And that, dear diary, is how I ended up witnessing the most fascinating display of human resilience in my entire academic career at the Galactic Medical Academy. But perhaps I should start from the beginning. The pristine halls of the Galactic Medical Academy's xenobiology wing sparkled under the artificial sunlight, designed to accommodate the diverse array of species that called this institution home. As a fourth-cycle medical student specializing in comparative xenobiology, I had grown accustomed to the sight of various beings from across the galaxy rushing to their classes, each carrying their species-specific medical equipment. My name is Zara Lith P. Taxis, though my classmates call me Zara. Like most Andromeans, I possess the characteristic bioluminescent markings that pulse with our emotional states, a trait that has made hiding my excitement rather challenging since the announcement of our newest exchange program. For the first time in the Academy's 300-cycle history, we would be welcoming a human student. The news had sent ripples of anticipation through our usually composed student body. Humans, after all, were somewhat of an enigma in the medical community. Their rapid rise to prominence in galactic society had left many of us scrambling to understand their peculiar biology. I remember the day Alexandra Bennett walked into our lecture hall. The human female stood at approximately 1.7 meters tall, with what I learned was a fairly common coloration pattern auburn hair and pale skin dotted with small melanin concentrations they called freckles. What fascinated me most was how she moved with such confidence despite being what we considered terrifyingly underprotected by evolutionary standards. No exoskeleton, no backup organs, no regenerative abilities. Just soft tissue wrapped in an easily punctured dermis layer. Professor Nixis, our lead xenobiology instructor, had practically glowed with delight when introducing her. Students, meet Alexandra Bennett, our first human exchange student from Earth's Global Medical Institute. She will be joining our comparative xenobiology program for the next 2 cycles. Alexandra, or Alex, as she insisted we call her, quickly proved herself to be an excellent student. Her insights into human medical practices were fascinating, often challenging our preconceptions about what constituted effective treatment. But none of us could have predicted how she would shatter our understanding of human resilience in the most dramatic way possible. Our class consisted of 12 students from various species. There was T-Lock, a Regilian with their characteristic crystalline exoskeleton. Maya Starweaver, a Neptunian whose liquid form body required a specialized containment suit. Blip, a consciousness-uploaded artificial being who chose to manifest as a floating sphere of light. And then there was me, with my bioluminescent patterns that had been flashing with increasing frequency as I found myself more and more intrigued by our human classmate. Little did I know that my fascination with human biology was about to be taken to an entirely new level. The event that would change our perspective forever occurred during what should have been a routine physical adaptation class in the Academy's simulation chamber. Who could have guessed that a simple training exercise would lead to a display of human capabilities that would leave even our most experienced professors speechless? But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real story began when Professor Nixis announced our practical examination in emergency medical responses. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as Professor Nixis calibrated the gravity settings. Today's physical adaptation class was designed to test our emergency response abilities in varying gravitational conditions. A standard exercise, one we'd done countless times before. Yet something felt different about today's session. Remember, students, Professor Nixis announced, her tentacles gracefully adjusting the control panel. We'll be simulating emergency scenarios in both high and low gravity environments. Your task is to demonstrate proper medical procedures while accounting for these conditions. The chamber was divided into 2 sections. The first zone was set to 2.3 times standard gravity, while the second maintained a mere 0.3. The challenge lay in transitioning between these zones while performing basic medical procedures. Simple tasks like administering injections or applying pressure bandages became significantly more complex when gravity decided to play tricks on you. Alex stood beside me, securing her safety harness. The standard blue medical uniform of the Academy hung loosely on her frame, and I noticed she'd tied her auburn hair back in what she called a ponytail. A practical choice, though I still found the name amusing. Humans and their peculiar naming conventions. "Ready for this, Zara?" she asked, flashing what I'd learned was a friendly smile. My bioluminescent patterns betrayed my nervous excitement with a soft purple glow. As ready as I'll ever be, I responded, checking my own equipment. Just remember, the transition between gravity zones can be quite disorienting for species not used to spatial variations. Alex laughed. Don't worry about me. I used to love roller coasters back on Earth. This should be fun. I had no idea what a roller coaster was, but before I could ask, Professor Nixis began the exercise. Our first task seemed straightforward enough. We had to transport medical supplies from the high-gravity zone to the low-gravity zone, simulating emergency resource distribution in varied environments. T-Lock moved with natural grace, their crystalline exoskeleton adapting seamlessly to the gravitational changes. Maya Starweaver's liquid form actually seemed to enjoy the challenge, flowing through the zones with elegant efficiency. Then came the moment that would be forever etched in my memory banks. Alex was making her third transfer when it happened. She'd just entered the high-gravity zone, carrying a case of synthetic plasma substitutes. The transition looked smooth at first, but then she shifted her weight slightly to adjust to the increased gravity. A movement that would have been perfectly fine under normal conditions. The next few seconds seemed to unfold in slow motion. Her foot caught on an uneven section of the floor, a minor imperfection in the chamber's surface that wouldn't have troubled most species with advanced proprioception. But for a human, it was enough to throw off her balance. I watched in horror as she stumbled forward, instinctively twisting to protect the medical supplies. The motion, combined with the increased gravitational pull, wrenched her shoulder at an awkward angle. The sound that followed, a distinct pop that echoed through the chamber, made my luminescence patterns flash a brilliant white in alarm. Alex, I shouted, already moving toward her, my medical training kicking in. But what happened next stopped me dead in my tracks. The entire class erupted into chaos. T-Lock's crystalline form vibrated with distress frequencies. Maya's liquid body rippled in patterns indicating extreme concern. Blip's spherical form flickered rapidly between various emergency colors. Professor Nixis's tentacles whipped through the emergency shutdown sequence for the gravity simulators. But Alex, she just sat there, the medical supplies still somehow secured in her other arm, looking more annoyed than distressed. "Oh great," she muttered, her voice carrying a tone that seemed entirely inappropriate for what we'd just witnessed. "Dislocated again." Again? My translator must have malfunctioned. Surely she hadn't said again? Professor Nixis's voice cut through the pandemonium. Everyone stay calm. Medical emergency protocols are being activated. A trauma team is already on its way from the Academy's main medical bay. "That's really not necessary," Professor Alex called out, her voice still maintaining that bizarrely casual tone. "I can fix this myself if someone could just help me up." Fix it herself. My bioluminescence patterns must have been strobing with anxiety because T-Lock placed a crystalline appendage on my shoulder in what I assumed was meant to be a comforting gesture. None of us moved to help her up. How could we? The human had just suffered a severe joint displacement. Moving her without proper medical supervision could cause catastrophic damage to her already fragile biological structure. Little did we know, we were about to witness something that would fundamentally change our understanding of human physiology and resilience. Though looking back, perhaps we should have paid more attention to that word she had used so casually again. What happened next would become legendary in the halls of the Galactic Medical Academy. The story would be passed down through generations of medical students, though many would dismiss it as mere exaggeration. I know better. I was there. While we all stood frozen in horror, Alex pushed herself up to a sitting position with her good arm. The medical supplies she'd been carrying remained perfectly organized in their case, which somehow made the whole situation even more surreal. "Look, I know this seems scary, but it's really not a big deal," she said, sounding for all the galaxy like she was discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a severe anatomical displacement. "This shoulder's got a habit of popping out. Happened all the time during basketball in college." Professor Nixis's tentacles curled in distress. "Please, Alexandra, remain still. The trauma team will be here in approximately 47 seconds. Alex sighed in a way that I would later learn humans called dramatically. With all due respect, Professor, I can handle this. I just need a flat surface and maybe someone to spot me. My bioluminescent patterns were cycling through every shade of alarm in my species' emotional spectrum. Spot her? Spot her for what? Surely she wasn't suggesting. She was. Before any of us could stop her, Alex had scooted herself over to the nearest wall. My fellow students and I watched in collective horror as she positioned herself with her injured side facing the wall. Alex, I found my voice, though it came out several octaves higher than normal. The recommended procedure for severe joint displacement is immediate immobilization followed by professional medical intervention. She actually laughed. Not a pained laugh, not a hysterical laugh, but a genuine chuckle of amusement. Zara, I appreciate the concern, but trust me, this is way faster. T-Lock's crystalline form was vibrating at such a high frequency that they were starting to produce an audible hum. Maya's liquid form had become so agitated that her containment suit was having trouble maintaining cohesion. Blip had switched to broadcasting in the infrared spectrum, a sign of extreme distress in their species. Now, Alex continued, as casual as if she were giving a routine class presentation, this might look a bit weird, but it's a pretty standard self-reduction technique. We learned it in sports medicine. Professor Nixis surged forward on her gravity discs, all 4 sets of eyes wide with panic. Alexandra Bennett, as your instructor, I must insist. But it was too late. In one smooth motion, Alex rotated her injured arm outward and leaned into the wall. There was another pop, just as loud as the first one. Several students released various species-specific sounds of distress. I'm pretty sure I saw Blip briefly phase out of our dimension. And then, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, Alex rolled her shoulder and grinned. See? Good as new. The trauma team chose that exact moment to burst through the simulation chamber doors, armed with every piece of emergency medical equipment available in the academy. They stopped dead in their tracks at the sight of their supposed patient standing there, casually rotating her recently relocated shoulder. The silence that followed was profound enough that you could have heard a Venetian micromite sneeze. Professor Nixis was the first to recover her composure. Alexandra, did you just manually relocate your own joint displacement without any form of pain management or medical assistance? Yeah, sorry about that, Alex replied, having the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I know protocol probably called for something more formal, but I figured it would be faster this way. The longer you wait, the harder it gets to pop back in. Pop back in. The casual way she described manually manipulating her own skeletal structure was almost as shocking as the act itself. But the pain, I stammered, my patterns now pulsing in confused waves, without neural suppressants or at least local anesthesia. Alex shrugged, then immediately apologized when several students flinched at the shoulder movement. Oh, right, sorry, but yeah, it does hurt, not gonna lie. Just not enough to warrant a whole emergency response team. Back on Earth, this kind of thing happens all the time in sports. The trauma team's lead physician, Dr. Stellar, stepped forward with their diagnostic scanner humming. You're saying this is common among humans? Well, not common, Alex clarified, submitting to the scan with good-natured patience. But common enough that most athletic trainers know how to handle it. My shoulder's just extra prone to it because of an old injury. That's why I know how to fix it myself. The scanner's results only added to our collective bewilderment. Everything was perfectly aligned. The joint had been restored to its proper position with a degree of precision that would have made our orthopedic surgeons envious. Professor Nixis's tentacles were now curled in what I recognized as her fascinating new research opportunity position. Alexandra, would you be willing to provide a detailed explanation of this self-administered medical procedure for our records? Sure, Alex replied brightly. Though you might want to sit down. The story of how I first learned to do this involves a trampoline, 3 pool noodles, and my cousin Brad's brilliant idea to recreate something he saw in a superhero movie. The next 2 hours were spent in what became an impromptu lecture on human joint mobility, pain tolerance, and what Alex called field medicine hacks the trauma team never left, torn between professional concern and obvious fascination. Even T-Lock's crystalline resonance had shifted from distress to intense academic interest. As I watched Alex enthusiastically demonstrate proper joint relocation techniques on a medical mannequin, I couldn't help but think about how wrong our initial assumptions about human fragility had been. Here we had been treating them like delicate glass sculptures, when in reality they were more like those earth devices Alex had told us about. What were they called? Ah yes, rubber bands. Flexible, resilient, and apparently capable of casually rebuilding themselves. The Academy's medical wing was buzzing with activity levels usually reserved for major astronomical events. News of the incident had spread faster than a quantum viral update, drawing medical professionals from every department. Alex sat on an examination table, surrounded by a fascinating array of scanning equipment and increasingly excited doctors. Dr. Stellar had called in the Academy's entire orthopedic department, who were now huddled around various holographic displays of Alex's shoulder joint. Their discussion had devolved into what could only be described as professional giddiness. "The connective tissue adaptation is remarkable," Dr. Luminary exclaimed, her bioluminescent patterns matching my own excitement. "Look at how the musculature automatically compensated for the displacement. And the proprioceptive awareness required to perform self-reduction," Dr. Nova added. All three of his eye stalks focused on different data streams. The neural pathways involved in such precise self-manipulation. Alex, for her part, seemed both amused and slightly overwhelmed by all the attention. "You guys really don't see this kind of thing often, huh?" Professor Nixis, who hadn't left since the incident, drew herself up to her full hovering height. "Alexandra, in my 157 cycles of teaching xenobiology, I have never witnessed any species voluntarily relocate their own skeletal structure without medical intervention." Really, Alex looked genuinely surprised. "But what about emergency situations? Like if you're somewhere remote and medical help isn't immediately available?" The room fell silent as medical professionals from a dozen different species contemplated this scenario. It was T-Lock who finally spoke up from their observation position near the door. "Our species typically evolved either robust external protection," they gestured to their own crystalline form, "or rapid healing capabilities," a nod toward Maya's liquid state. "The concept of manually reassembling our bodies is unsettling." "Humans are unsettling," Blip contributed, their spherical form pulsing with what we'd learned was their version of nervous laughter. "No offense, Alex." "None taken," Alex grinned. "Though I should probably warn you, this isn't even the weird stuff. Wait until I tell you about how humans sometimes have to reset broken noses." Several medical monitors registered spike in stress indicators from various medical staff members. Dr. Stellar stepped forward, datapad in appendage. "Alexandra, would you be willing to participate in a comprehensive study of human emergency medical responses? Your species' ability to perform self-diagnosis and treatment could revolutionize our approach to emergency medicine." "Sure," Alex nodded, then paused. "Though maybe we should wait until after the weekend? I promised to teach Zara and some of the others about human recreational activities. We're going to try something called bowling." I noticed several of the medical staff exchange concerned glances. Professor Nixis's tentacles curled in what I recognized as her preparing to intervene position. Perhaps she suggested carefully, given today's excitement, a less physically demanding activity would be more appropriate. Alex laughed. "Oh, don't worry. Bowling is super safe. Well, unless you drop the ball on your foot, or get your fingers stuck, or slip on the lane. You know what? Maybe we should start with mini golf instead." The medical staff's concern did not appear to be alleviated. Dr. Nova cleared his throat, or at least made the Centaurian equivalent of that sound. "Before we discuss recreational activities, I would like to review the biomechanical data from today's incident. The readings suggest that your pain response was well below what our models predicted for such an injury." "Oh yeah, the pain thing." Alex shifted on the examination table, causing several monitoring devices to beep an alarm. "That's probably worth discussing. Humans have this neat trick called adrenaline." What followed was a fascinating 2-hour lecture on human emergency biological responses. The medical staff's horror gradually transformed into academic enthusiasm as Alex described various situations where humans had performed extraordinary feats of self-preservation and medical improvisation. And that's why you should never underestimate a human with duct tape and basic first aid knowledge, she concluded, to a room full of furiously taking notes. Professor Nixis had filled 3 data pads with observations. This is extraordinary. Your species' ability to adapt and improvise medical solutions goes far beyond anything we've documented in standard xenobiology texts. Improvisation is kind of our thing, Alex admitted. My great-grandmother once used superglue to close a cut when she was out hiking. Worked perfectly fine until she could get to a doctor. She used adhesive as a medical supply. Dr. Steller's professional composure finally cracked. That's brilliant, Alex suggested. Terrifying, Dr. Steller corrected. Though also, yes, brilliant in a distinctly human way. I found myself nodding along, my patterns glowing with new understanding. The more we learned about humans, the more fascinating they became. Their bodies weren't fragile at all, they were incredibly adaptable, designed to bend rather than break, to heal rather than avoid injury altogether. I believe Professor Nixis announced, her tentacles arranged in what we all recognized as her important academic declaration. Information that we need to completely revise our emergency medicine curriculum. Alexandra's demonstration today has highlighted significant gaps in our understanding of biological adaptability and emergency response capabilities. The medical staff murmured in agreement, already forming research groups and planning new studies. I noticed several of them eyeing Alex with what could only be described as academic hunger. Hey, Alex raised her hands in mock surrender. I'm happy to help with research, but maybe we could start with something simple, like how humans can crack their knuckles. The sound of several medical professionals dropping their data pads echoed through the room. Actually, Alex continued, clearly enjoying herself now, there's this whole list of weird things humans can do with their joints. Want to hear about voluntary finger dislocation? Dr. Steller's monitoring badge began flashing with stress indicators. Perhaps Professor Nixis intervened smoothly. We should process today's data before exploring additional human medical peculiarities. I watched as my fellow students and the medical staff filed out of the room, their conversations a mix of professional excitement and mild trauma. Alex hopped off the examination table, rolling her shoulder experimentally. Well, she said, turning to me with that characteristic human smile, that was fun. Still up for bowling this weekend. My patterns flickered between academic curiosity and medical concern. Only if you promise to teach me more about human emergency medical techniques, though perhaps without the practical demonstrations. Deal, she laughed. Though wait until you hear about what humans can do with broken toes and tape. The monitoring equipment in the corner started beeping again. Somewhere down the hall, I heard what sounded like Dr. Steller scheduling an emergency meditation session. The next xenobiology class was unlike any we'd had before. Professor Nixis had converted our usual lecture hall into what Alex called a roundtable discussion format, though the furniture remained decidedly non-circular to accommodate various species seating requirements. Today, Professor Nixis announced, her tentacles arranged in an educational pattern, we will be discussing emergency medical approaches across species, with a special focus on adaptive responses and self-treatment methods. Alex sat in her usual spot, now surrounded by curious classmates, rather than the respectful distance they'd maintained before. The incident had transformed her from an interesting curiosity into something of a medical marvel. So T-Lock began, their crystalline form shimmering with academic interest. Humans regularly perform medical procedures on themselves. Well, not regularly, Alex clarified, but we can if we need to. It's part of our basic survival instinct. Humans are pretty good at figuring out solutions on the fly. Maya rippled thoughtfully in her containment suit. But how do you determine when self-treatment is appropriate versus seeking professional medical assistance? That's where it gets interesting. Alex leaned forward, her enthusiasm evident. We have this unofficial system called the "is it really bad though" scale. Professor Nixis's recording tentacle perked up. Could you elaborate on this diagnostic system? It's not exactly official medical science, Alex laughed. But basically, we ask ourselves, can we still walk? Is anything actively bleeding? Did we hear any concerning noises? Can we move all our important bits? Blip's spherical form flickered with confusion. That seems imprecise. Oh, it totally is, Alex agreed cheerfully. But you'd be surprised how effective it can be. Humans have this amazing ability to just kind of know when something is really wrong versus just inconvenient. I found my patterns glowing with curiosity. But what about the risk of improper treatment? That's where human improvisation comes in, Alex explained. We've turned all sorts of regular items into emergency medical supplies. Popsicle sticks make great finger splints. Clean t-shirts can become bandages. One time my friend turned a credit card and some tape into a butterfly closure for a cut. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Professor Nixus's tentacles were practically dancing with academic excitement. Your species adapts everyday objects for medical use, she asked, all 4 sets of eyes wide with fascination. Humans adapt everything for everything, Alex nodded. We're basically space raccoons. If we can pick it up, we'll figure out at least 3 ways to use it. Space raccoon's T-Lock's crystalline form vibrated with confusion. Oh, right, Alex grinned. That's another Earth animal. They're these clever little creatures that, you know what? Maybe we should stick to the medical discussion for now. The point is, humans are really good at working with what we have. Professor Nixus gestured with her primary tentacle set. This adaptive capability seems to contradict our initial assessment of human fragility. That's because you were looking at it wrong, Alex explained. Humans aren't fragile, we're flexible. Sure, we can get hurt easier than some species, but we're really good at dealing with those injuries and keeping going. Maya's liquid form swirled thoughtfully, like your shoulder incident. Exactly, Alex beamed. A dislocated shoulder isn't fun, but it's not the end of the world. Humans are built to handle a certain amount of damage and keep functioning. Like biological redundancy systems, Blip suggested, their form brightening with understanding. More like biological determination, Alex corrected. We don't have backup organs like some species, but we have an amazing ability to adapt and keep going even when things aren't working perfectly. The discussion continued, with each species sharing their own approach to medical emergencies. T-Lock explained how their crystalline form could temporarily seal cracks until proper molecular realignment could be performed. Maya demonstrated how her liquid state could simply flow around damaged areas. Blip described their ability to redistribute their energy form to compensate for compromised sections. Alex pointed out. Everyone has their own way of handling things. Humans just happen to be really good at the emergency patch job approach. Professor Nixus's tentacles curled in what we'd learned was her thoughtful position. Perhaps we should integrate more species-specific emergency response techniques into our curriculum. This exchange of medical knowledge could benefit all of us. Agreed, I found myself saying, my patterns glowing with enthusiasm. Each species has developed unique solutions to similar problems. By understanding these different approaches, we could develop more comprehensive emergency protocols. Plus, Alex added with a grin, it would be really helpful to know what not to do. Like I probably shouldn't try to help T-Lock with a crystalline fracture using my human first aid knowledge. Please do not, T-Lock agreed, their form vibrating with what might have been amusement. As the class concluded, I noticed something had changed. The careful distance my fellow students had maintained from our human classmate had disappeared. Instead, small groups had formed, each eagerly sharing their species' unique medical approaches and emergency responses. Alex moved between these groups, asking questions and sharing stories, building bridges between different biological perspectives. She had transformed from an object of concern into a valued source of alternative medical knowledge. You know, she said to me as we left the lecture hall, I think this whole shoulder incident might have been the best thing that could have happened. Nothing brings people together like sharing weird medical stories. Looking at my classmates' animated discussions and Professor Nixus's delighted tentacle arrangements, I had to agree. Sometimes it takes a dislocated shoulder to relocate perspectives. The rest of that academic cycle brought numerous changes to the Galactic Medical Academy. The most obvious was the newly established Department of Emergency Improvisation Techniques, inspired directly by what became known as the shoulder incident. And that, dear diary, brings me to today's graduation ceremony. I write, my patterns glowing with nostalgia as I finish recording these memories. Who would have thought that a dislocated shoulder would revolutionize our entire approach to emergency medicine? The Academy's grand ceremonial hall buzzes with excitement. Today marks the first graduation of what the administration calls the post-shoulder incident class. Alex sits among us, her blue graduation robe matching everyone else's, though she's added what she calls a party hat to her formal academic cap. Professor Nixis takes the podium, her tentacles arranged in the most formal of patterns. Distinguished guests, honored faculty and graduating class of 2357, today marks a historic moment in medical education. She's right about that. Our class is the first to complete the new comprehensive emergency response curriculum, which includes everything from traditional medical procedures to what Alex calls MacGyver medicine, named after some human medical pioneer, I assume. This graduating class, Professor Nixis continues, has not only mastered traditional medical practices, but has also revolutionized our understanding of adaptive emergency response techniques. Thanks to insights gained from our human exchange program, we now better understand that medical excellence isn't just about following established procedures, but also about knowing when and how to improvise. I noticed Dr. Stellar in the audience, wearing the proud expression of someone who's just published a groundbreaking paper. Their recent study on human emergency medical adaptability has become required reading across all major medical institutions in the galaxy. Furthermore, Professor Nixis adds, her tentacles curling with pride, this class has established the first interspecies emergency response protocol, incorporating techniques and approaches from every known sentient species. Alex catches my eye and grins. That protocol had been her idea, born from countless hours of species sharing their unique approaches to medical emergencies. Who knew that a Neptunian's liquid form manipulation techniques could be adapted to help treat certain solid form injuries? As you leave these halls, Professor Nixis concludes, remember that true medical wisdom comes not just from knowing the rules, but from understanding when and how to adapt them. Each species brings unique perspectives and solutions to the field of medicine. Together, we are stronger, more adaptable, and better equipped to handle whatever emergencies the galaxy throws at us. The ceremony concludes with the traditional transfer of medical credentials, though this year each graduate also receives an emergency improvisation kit, complete with what Alex assures us is actual medical-grade duct tape. After the ceremony, our class gathers for one final photo. It's a sight that would have seemed impossible at the start of our education: a human, an Andromean, a Regilian crystalline being, a Neptunian liquid form, and a consciousness-uploaded artificial being, all standing together as equals, as friends, as fellow medical professionals. So Alex says as we prepare to go our separate ways, anyone up for one last game of bowling before we all head off to our residencies? T-Lock's crystalline form vibrates with what I now recognize as laughter. Only if you promise not to demonstrate any more emergency medical techniques. No promises, Alex winks. But hey, at least now you all know what to do if something goes wrong. Maya's liquid form swirls with amusement. I still can't believe your species invented sports that regularly result in dislocated joints. Invented them, Alex laughs. We made them Olympic events. As I watch my classmates joke and plan their evening, I reflect on how much has changed since that day in the simulation chamber. We entered the academy thinking we knew everything about medical science, about the classification of species as robust or fragile, about the proper way to handle emergencies. One dislocated shoulder later, we learned that sometimes the species you think needs the most protection might just be the one teaching you about resilience. That what looks like fragility might actually be flexibility. That the proper way to handle an emergency might sometimes involve popsicle sticks and creative thinking. Hey Zara, Alex calls out, breaking me from my reflection. You coming? I promised to teach everyone about this human victory celebration called a high five. My patterns pulse with joy as I join my friends. Yes, humans might be what Alex calls space raccoons, turning everything they touch into potential medical supplies. They might approach emergency medicine with a casualness that still occasionally gives Dr. Stellar stress indicators. But they've taught us something invaluable, that true medical wisdom isn't just about knowing the rules, but about understanding when to adapt them. That sometimes the best solution isn't the most sophisticated one, but the one that works right now. And if that solution happens to involve duct tape, well, that's just another lesson learned from our remarkable human friends. And personal log. Medical student Zara Lith P. Taxis. Galactic Medical Academy, class of 2357. Post-shoulder incident graduate.